Hi guys, I want to talk today about some of the wider textual evidence. Now, this is in lead up to our final SAC, but also for the exam as well. I'm looking for you to really explore those really nitty-gritty parts of the text and compare those. But what I want to look at today is how do we compare those pieces of nitty-gritty poetic language or filmic techniques to those wider themes that you're going to have to deal with in the essay topics. So let's take a look. So let's look at the original material. Ransom is using poetic language, and this is kind of a tip of the hat to the original tellings of the story, which were told orally, and these are called epic poems. So Malouf's own language is actually reflecting and corresponding, bridging that gap between the novel, which is quite a recent invention in literary terms, and those epic poems of thousands of years ago. So what is Friers doing? Friers is doing an interesting thing where he's writing in his own story. He's writing in a lot of those conversations and puts a bit of symbolism in there, and he kind of invents things, but it's an original story. It's a true story that happened, and how he kind of bridges that gap is to utilize the original footage, original newspaper headlines, and even kind of snapshots of Diana in there, interspersed throughout the film, gives it that sense that it's placed in a real time, in a real event, even though we've got actors playing the key roles, and we've got conversations that we could not possibly have known about. We couldn't, the public wouldn't have known about the conversations between Blair and Queen Elizabeth, or what happened to Queen Elizabeth in Balmoral estate by herself. So there's things that had to be invented there, but Friers is using these original parts from that time in order to kind of to tie his story or his telling of that time to that specific event. Let's have a look at poetic language to start with. I've been asked a few times about how do we actually talk about Malouf's poetic language? Even it's there, but what do we do with it? So here are some, here's one key passage which was quite poetic. It's in part one. It's essentially the very first part of the novel. The sea's surface bellies and glistens, a lustrous silver blue, a membrane stretched into a fine transparency where once, for 9 changes of the moon, we had hung curled in a dream of pre-existence and was rocked and comforted. Sorry, he had hung curled in a dream of pre-existence. So here we've got consonants. We've got repeated consonant sounds, sea surface bellies. So we've got that repeated s, and the glistens and lustrous silver blue. So we've got this kind of consonants happening. We've got imagery, so that is where an image is created in your mind because of these words. So it's a description. We've got kinesthesia, which is an interesting word to use. You might want to try that in your essay, but it's about that sense of movement in a sentence. So because of the way it's phrased, we've got that sense of movement. Okay, so bellies and glistens, so the sea surface is kind of moving, and I get that sense of movement from bellies and glistens. So it's kind of upward inflection and down, the way we pronounce that, bellies and glistens. So it's kind of up and down. And so what are we going to do with that? We've got this great poetic snapshot from our novel, but how are we going to compare that? So what I might do with that is try and link it to an idea. So what the idea is that I gain from that is that's Achilles kind of connecting to his mother self, his mother nature, his mother element, where his mother is from the sea. So you can talk about family. So that's a connection to a theme of family. Or you could also talk about the theme of identity. Okay, so and the way I've done that is to say that maybe that can be compared to when she must change her words in her tribute, and she is to add the words "and as a grandmother." So that's where you could kind of compare that. But when you're asked to take that poetic language and compare it to something in the Queen, look for a theme within that poetic language. And I see the theme of family in there. I also see the theme of identity. Let's have a look at another example. It's from page 4. It's very early on as well. Small waves slither to the sandaled feet, then sluice away with a rattling sound as the smooth stones loosen and go rolling. Notice that consonants again. We've got that S sound all the way through. Now consonance is different from alliteration. Alliteration is the starting sound of every word, but consonance is a repeated consonant sound, so it can be anywhere within the words. Okay, but we've also got onomatopoeia there. So the sound of the water is reflected in the words chosen. Okay, that's what makes it poetic. Small waves slither to his sandaled feet, then sluice away. So I get this s, and that's kind of the way that the water sounds as it's lapping at feet and kind of pulling away again. And then we've got rattling of the stones. And so this is a stony beach. This is not like an Aussie beach where we've got just pure sand all the time. We've got stones on the side of the beach here. So there's this rattling of those pebbles. So what can we do with that? And I thought, oh, that sounds, it's very kind of natural sounding, isn't it? It's very kind of the earth. So where do we see that in the Queen? Well, she's out in the middle of Balmoral Estate. She's broken down in the river. And we could compare that to when Queen Elizabeth spots the stag for the first time. She's actually crying. She cries just before this, and she's not crying about having her car broken down. She's crying about everything that's happening. This immense pressure on the family. Diana's died, and it actually it has great consequences for her grandchildren, even though Diana is not in the family anymore. So just have a look down there. We've got Maloof using poetic language to convey sound. Okay, that's good. And where do we see that in the Queen? Friers uses silence and natural sounds. Okay, so in this particular scene, we've got the Queen, and we've got trickling of water, and then we've got gunshots. And as soon as she hears gunshots out in the distance, she tells the stag to shoo. We've also got this gentle score. It sounds kind of like an oboe, kind of like this low wind instrument, and it's almost melodic. It's really kind of low, and you could compare that to that poetic sound in the language of Maloof. Let's also have a look at openings and closings just quickly. Maloof opens his novel with introductions to his central characters, Achilles and Priam. So both part 1 and part 2 show the character's current state, and then they go back in time to their childhoods. What does Maloof do, though? Maloof uses this to parallel the characters with each other. So that kind of start of part 1, start of part 2, well, let's compare our central characters with each other. All right? The Queen does this as well, with the Queen sitting for her portrait, and she's watching Blair, who's just been elected the Prime Minister. So paralleling them, and you could use the word juxtaposition. The portrait painting is scene is juxtaposed against footage of Blair winning his election. What about the closings, though? We've got Ransom closing with Somax retelling the story of how he took the king to Achilles' tent, though no one believes him anymore, and think better of his mule than of him, his mule called Beauty. So it's interesting how we've got Maloof kind of closing on it's like a trailing off kind of thing. And maybe that highlights the nature of legends, which feel more fanciful and unreal, but the reality of Somax telling people that he's the one who did it, people don't believe him. Like, they believe the legend of it, but they don't believe the actual telling of it, which comes from Somax. And that's an interesting thing, which is kind of the opposite of what happens in The Queen, where Friers seeks to base his story in reality, and he's using actual footage and news headlines to do that. And we believe, the audience believes those made up bits. We believe the conversations that had to be written for the movie because Friers has centered it around these real footage, actual footage taken from that time. So we don't doubt those conversations, even the one between the portrait artist and the Queen here. We don't doubt it at all, because we see, oh, this is a real life event. This is not the legend of, you know, Achilles and Priam that Maloof explores. Let's have a look at some poetry and newspaper headlines. So you could compare Maloof's use of language and newspaper headlines. Newspaper headlines tend to use poetic language all the time because they need to be short and sharp and pithy. They need to be memorable and interesting. So they're used throughout the Queen, and they're used in a kind of a summary way. They summarize what the public think of Blair, or they think of Queen Elizabeth. So rather than having this in-depth conversation about what different people think, they just use the headlines. The headlines are what people think. So here are some headlines that you could use. The saddest homecoming. So that's when Diana's casket comes across to England. Show us there's a heart in the House of Windsor. Used to criticise the Queen there. And Palace bends knee to Blair. That's the headline in the Times there, used to say that Blair has heavily influenced the Queen, and that's why she's coming back to London rather than staying in Balmoral. So let's just look at a couple of shots here. We've got a low angle shot there. It's a close-up shot that emphasises Queen Elizabeth's expression. She's crying and saddened by Diana's death, but also coming to a further realisation about what Diana meant to the people of England as she reads the messages on the flowers. So just there, she's walking around Buckingham Palace there, and she also walks around Balmoral Estate at the front there, at the fence, and she's reading what people have written about her and about Diana, and it's quite scathing, often quite scathing about what they think of Queen Elizabeth. So she's kind of reflecting on that as she cries. So we've got a high angle shot as well. This is quite a nice scene where Queen Elizabeth is essentially redeemed by the public. So here it's symbolised by this little girl who gives her flowers. So Queen Elizabeth says, "Hey, would you like me to put those down for you?" And the girl says, "No, they're for you." So that's symbolising the public and how they've changed in their attitude to the Queen. Here we've got, so the evidence that you might use in an essay is a high angle medium shot, if you'd like to phrase it like that, or a high angle shot emphasising Queen Elizabeth's interaction with a cute supporter who gives her flowers. A close-up, so there's another one, a close-up of the Queen then shows her happy, relieved expression, symbolising the public's renewed trust and love for her. So just be mindful of the way that's phrased there. I've tried to phrase those descriptions as how you might actually describe that in an essay. Again, don't be too long-winded with your descriptions of the shot, but use it to make a point about, a point which backs up your essay topic. You could look at zooming. So there's this zooming part, zooming out. It was really close to the flowers, and then kind of panning across the flowers, and then it zooms out to show the enormity, the sheer amount of flowers that have been put in front of Buckingham Palace. So that might symbolise the public outpouring of grief for Diana. And they're doing that at Buckingham Palace. It's interesting they do it there because the public still view Diana as a royal. So this shows, by putting the flowers at Buckingham Palace, it shows that they view her as a royal, rather than putting it at Diana, Spencer's family home or something like that. So a zoom is used to do that. This is a funny scene. It's really kind of a mocking scene of Lord Airlie. So we've got this overhead shot looking down at this meeting. And it's showing the extensive amount of people at the meeting. So maybe it's overkill, the amount of people. They've all got suits on. They're all stuffy. It's all very formal. It's in a very formal place. It symbolises how small and petty their discussions are and how disconnected they are from an emotional response to the tragedy. Okay, so that's what this overhead shot kind of looks down on them for that. And the dialogue also is coupled in with that. So we've got this knock, knock, knock. Lord Airlie kind of brings everyone to attention. And he says this: Right, it's 10 o'clock. Let's get started, shall we? And thank you all for coming at such short notice. I think we all agree that this is an extraordinarily sensitive occasion that presents us with tremendous challenges logistically, constitutionally, practically, diplomatically, and procedurally. And so to that, we've got Blair's kind of advisor kind of mocking that and scoffing. So there's a pan shot. It goes from this overhead shot and then it pans through from Lord Airlie through all these people, mostly men, sitting at the table. And then it gets to Blair's advisor at the other end who scoffs. And this is about protocol. This is about what is meant to be done. You know, it would not surprise me if you got an essay topic on protocol or what is, you know, doing what is meant to be done in your exam. Let's moving on. So I mentioned before about Frier's use of original footage. It's all throughout, and often quite long. There's long stretches of this use of that. So we've got a shot of Tony Blair next to original footage of Diana. So it tries to put the actor in the film in the context of the tragedy, and it aids in that coherence of that historical drama that actually puts the actors and it makes it feel like it's actually Tony Blair rather than this disjointed you know, retelling. It's actually trying to make it one cohesive film. So let's compare that to Ransom now. Maloof uses the same narrative as the original Greek mythology, as well as the same characters, and that's apart from Somax. Somax is written in by Maloof. So Frier's is trying to put his story into that original context, whereas Maloof is trying to retell the original story. And hopefully you see the distinction there. Frier's has his story that he's telling, and he's trying to tell the story of Tony Blair and Queen Elizabeth in the context of the Diana tragedy. So he's trying to push his story into that historical event of Diana's death, whereas Maloof is retelling the Achilles-Priam meeting. Okay, he's retelling what was already there and putting in a couple of his own little bits. All right, so it's quite a fine distinction between those two. Let's have a look at the idea of time in it as well. Ransom had these flashbacks and flash forwards, and I don't know when you were reading it whether you felt like, oh, what time is it? You know, what's the present? You know, what is this present moment? And actually, we're not really sure, you know, most of the time. Most of the time, you can look for your verbs, and present tense verbs tells you what's happening at the time, but it's very fluid. Looking back in time, sometimes it's a memory, sometimes an actual flashback, sometimes it's this kind of prophecy of what's happening in the future. Achilles and Priam and Somax all do it, more so with Achilles and Priam. So I'll let you have a look at those, but for the Queen, we've got the flashbacks and flash forwards. Well, it's all pretty much set in that one time. It's a series of months. It revolves around the week between Diana's death and her funeral. However, we've got either side of that. We've got months before, we've got Blair being elected, and then months after, we've got Blair and Queen Elizabeth having another meeting together. But the nature of time there is interesting for the Queen in that Frier's lets us know each day. So he changes the day by putting it on the screen: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. He also shows us through headlines from the newspapers. Each time a new headline comes out, that's a new day. So we've got this kind of, the idea of time is important for the Queen, but maybe it's not as fluid as Ransom. Ransom is kind of back and forward all the time, whereas the Queen is much more structured, much more kind of rigorous in how that's laid out. The symbolism of the stag. Now, I've touched on this a few times with my previous videos, but I think maybe some more explicit comparisons could be made here. You could describe it as serendipitous moment. So the moment out in the field when she's broken down, her car's broken down, it's kind of serendipitous. There's this beautiful moment that she has. Maybe it's an epiphany of how beautiful it could be. But here, the picture that I've coupled it with is when she actually goes back to see it dead. She hears that it's been shot by a neighbouring estate, and she goes to see it. She wants to see the dead body, and she hasn't seen Diana yet. She hasn't been in London for Diana's body to arrive there. So perhaps this is kind of mirroring her grief here. She's realizing that this was a beautiful person who has died before her time, just like the stag is beautiful, and she's kind of enamored by it. But also, it could symbolize the queen herself, realizing that her own monarchy is in jeopardy due to her own actions. So she's realizing that the public opinion against her is very strong, and Blair is actually trying to help her, even though she feels he's a bit rude about it. She feels like, hang on, this could be me, this could be the monarchy, and she has actually given her life to protect the monarchy. So let's compare this to Ransom then. There's many animal references, so if we're talking specifically about the symbolism of the stag, there's many animal references throughout Ransom. There's a few of them with Achilles. Achilles' men are referred to as hawks, foxes, and wolves. We've also got Priam, who delights in the fish. He puts his feet in the water, and the fish found him every bit as disappointing and without interest as the driver. So that shows that for the fish, Priam is just the same as Somax. So who cares about these people? They're not interesting to the fish. It doesn't matter if you're a king or a common man, they're not interesting. They're just people. So that kind of shows that empathy and that connection between Somax and Priam as well. Zeus's symbol is mentioned there a number of times. It's the eagle. We know that that's a chicken hawk that was changed at the end of part 2. We've got this chicken hawk that's in the sky, and instead of naming it the chicken hawk, as Somax sees it, he sees that's chicken hawk, and then it's renamed by priest Helenus, and he calls it an eagle. And by doing so, it shows that, hey, Zeus is on our side. If the eagle's up in the sky, that means Zeus is here and he's watching, and that's an omen that this is going to go well. You could also compare this symbolism of the stag to the treasure on Somax's cart. This represents Hector's body. And Priam actually kind of speaks about it as his son's body. He says, I shall just stay here in the wagon with the body of my son. And that's when Somax wants Priam to get out of the cart to have some griddle cakes and put his feet in the water to have a rest. And then for Achilles, so we've got this other idea of the body, a dead body here. For Achilles, Hector's body represents Achilles' failure to protect Patroclus. It also kind of embodies his guilt and anger, and he's trying to get rid of guilt and anger by dragging his body behind his chariot every day. So we've got that kind of parallel kind of dead body thing, which is kind of morbid, about the stag, and then Hector as well, that you could compare it to, but they mean very different things. There's no anger or guilt for the queen in this. So for the queen, she sees perhaps Diana in that, or she sees perhaps herself, but it's not this anger or guilt. Whereas for Achilles and Priam, it's Hector's body is something else. By getting Hector's body back, Priam wants to become a legend. He becomes a legend through that. Whereas for Achilles, he wants to get rid of it, which will actually free him. It will liberate him from his guilt and anger. Guys, this is the last little bit. Well, what are you going to do now? I've given you a lot of different ideas there. What are you going to do with them? Okay, so what I want you to do is this. So select specific evidence from what I've just explored here and use it in the essay topic. So if the essay topic asks about a specific theme, then have a look through at these pieces of evidence again and see which ones kind of fit that theme. Okay, so essentially you're identifying evidence there. So now I want you also to use the specific meta language to describe that evidence. So don't just say, in the scene where such and such happens, actually use the language, the headlines, the mise-en-scene, camera angles and shots, openings and closings, all of that language that I just used to describe that evidence. That's what I want you to use in the essay as well. Okay, last little thing here. Describe this evidence with short, sharp descriptions. Do not waffle on. Instead, so you kind of change the way you're thinking about maybe the teal structure. Don't just think, oh, I'm going to, now I need the evidence, so I'll write about evidence. No, throughout the whole paragraph, you are trying to explore the essay topic. That's in your head, just change it. You're trying to explore the essay topic, and by doing that, you need to borrow some of that evidence in order to explore that. Okay, so don't just think of this rigid teal thing. Actually, you're trying to explore the essay topic, and by doing so, you need some evidence. Okay, guys, hope that's helpful for you. I'll see you later.